All right, everyone. We are going with another session, another episode of Public Relations Declassified. All right, so what we're going to do here, I got a couple of topics we're going to run through. If you guys have questions along the way, go ahead and drop them into the chat wherever you're seeing this, whether it's YouTube, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. Drop those in the chat. Chrissy's going to be keeping an eye out for those. And when we get to the Q&A portion here, you guys will have the ability to just go ahead and click on that link and pop in on camera and ask questions or share feedback or, whatever you want to say. So that being said, let's go ahead and kick this off. So the first topic we're going to hit on here, well, let me just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to be doing here. So first is going to be MSNBC on the chopping block. Now, somebody in particular is very interested in this and has a very unique plan for repurposing this. So this is going to be really interesting. We're going to talk about what this means for the media industry and also how that applies to you as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, because this has huge impact on what you're going to be doing to market and promote your business. We're also going to talk about Jaguar doubling down on their absolutely failed rebrand. So this highlights exactly how not to handle a PR crisis. So we're going to break that all down here in a bit. And we're also going to talk about how to demonstrate your knowledge without sounding like a douche. Now, this is really tough for a lot of people. You see a lot of people get it wrong online or on stage or in TV segments, whatever. So we're going to talk about how to get it right, how to show that you know what you're doing, but not come off as an arrogant and pompous ass, right? We're also going to talk about Blue Sky and whether it's worth anything from a marketing perspective. We're going to unpack the PR genius behind Kendrick Lamar's latest album and how you can use that in your business. We're also going to talk about 3 tactics to ace your next remote TV interview or video podcast for that matter. And this comes from one of the digital guides that we've got. And then we'll close this out with Jeremy's PR PSA, which is essentially when somebody makes a really stupid PR mistake, that's when my expertise, my twisted humor, and schadenfreude all come together to make this handy and usually funny public relations lesson for you guys. So that's always a lot of fun, and that's how we'll close the session out today. All right, so opening up with MSNBC. All right, so this did recently hit the news. It kind of got interesting when this was an announcement from Comcast not too long ago, and part of this comes down to the performance of that particular show, or not show, but network. So, for example, the Rachel Maddow show, that is the Liberal Network's most highly rated program, and it had about 1.3 million viewers on Monday, right after the election, and this was a huge drop from where it's been, right? It's been declining for years, but after the election, basically everything dried up. And these shows aren't getting the viewership. They're not getting the advertiser dollars. So, and not just the shows, right? Also, a lot of digital publications, newspapers, magazines, a lot of these are running into this. MSNBC just happens to be one of the ones that's getting hit the hardest. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but we'll save that for another day. But when this was announced, this came from essentially Elon Musk joking about buying the network, right? When Comcast announced that it was up for sale, he did this in the most Trump way ever. I'm sorry, not Trump, Musk. Basically, Donald Trump Jr. posted about the sale from Comcast, and Elon simply replied with, "How much does it cost?" Now, this is hilarious because I love how he trolls people and he's able to get massive reactions. But nobody was less amused than our little friend here, Rachel Maddow.
To at least 3. Can we put up the graphic of this? I think I'm going to have to hand this off. Yeah. Sorry. That does it for us tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow.
All right. So all humor aside, what does this mean as, an entrepreneur, as a business owner? So we're seeing this a lot. MSNBC is just getting hit the hardest and the earliest because they're the ones who are getting the lowest ratings rather. They don't have a strong audience. They're not really getting a lot of ad dollars. So they're starting to get affected sooner. But this is a topic that I've been talking about for a while. And this is basically how the rise of independent journalism is basically changing not only the media landscape, but also from an entrepreneurial standpoint, how you're going to market your business. So this is really important because what used to work before didn't work, it doesn't work now. And part of that is because the journalists who are creating this content are often stretched so thin that it's very difficult to, get your story in there, right? So it obviously can definitely be done if you've got the right strategies, the right tactics, but it's far more difficult today than it's ever been. So, but this also means that it gives you an opportunity to get out there and be that voice. But also you can leverage these other voices. You can collaborate with these other voices. And a lot of people are seeking out, individuals who are sharing particular information. We saw it a lot during the recent election, but we're seeing it a lot across every industry, right? So the key here is not just going after these large publications, which still tremendous value in them from a marketing standpoint, from a credibility and authority standpoint. But where you're going to see a lot of impact in the coming years is doing collaborations with these other people who are basically acting as independent journalists, right? These content creators, these influencers. This is going to have a huge impact for you. And if you're jumping on this sooner than most other people, it's going to give you a kind of a first mover advantage in this new landscape, right? So essentially, and this is tied into this as well, is at this point, we are all media companies, whether we want to or not. We have to create content. We have to be putting this out there to cut through all that noise. So this change of the media landscape, and also now, as a result, the change in the social media landscape really changes how we will use these channels in the future. So we need to be getting out here, still using the large publications, still leveraging that, but also come out here and start working with some of these smaller influencers, these people that maybe they don't have this giant audience, right? So for context, MSNBC has an audience of, I think one of their last shows was like 500,000 viewers, right? Which sounds like a lot. Right? Any of us look at our, podcast downloads, YouTube viewers, anything like this, web traffic. To most of us, 500,000 people on a particular episode sounds like a lot. But the reality is, for a network of that size, with the resources that they've got, the footprint that they have, they should be getting a hell of a lot more exposure, a lot more reach than they are. So this is where things get interesting when you start going with some of these smaller influencers, right? I know we got Deb on here watching right now. She's a good example. She doesn't have a huge audience. She's got a decent sized audience, but it's not huge. But the people who are connected with her, and all of you guys should, I know she dropped a comment here in the group a little bit ago. You guys should all look her up and go connect with her. She's actually got this really cool summit that you should talk to her about. And I know she's always looking for great speakers. But this is an example of this concept in practice. So essentially what happens is you get some giant brand or some giant company, some giant media outlet, whatever, and they share something about you. There's a certain level of authority that comes with that, but there's not a lot of kind of passion, a lot of enthusiasm to take action. So when you see a smaller influencer, though, we'll use Deb, for example, if she posts about something, the people in her network, they know her very well. They trust her. They're looking to her for advice and guidance. So when she says, hey, do this thing, check out this software, speak at this event, all of these various things, what happens is those people, because of the relationship with her, they're a lot more engaged. They're a lot more active. And this can be, even though you don't reach the same amount of people, it could be far more profitable than some of the things you'll do with much larger outlets. So that's something that we definitely need to look at and take action on. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about Jaguar's rebrand. Now, I talked about this in last week's live stream. Well, the backlash was huge and pretty much nobody liked it. Unfortunately, the brand decided to double down, basically accused everybody who criticized the brand as being, bigots, intolerant, etc. That didn't really go over very well. People are tired of being lectured. But the best thing to come out of this is this Guardian headline, taking a really good shot at these clowns behind this. This is something that I've talked about before from a PR crisis perspective. We're going to jump into that in a second, but let's talk about what's going on with the brand right now. So this is Jaguar sales year over year. And as you can see, they've not been doing good for a long time. Now with this rebrand, I'm not sure what the goal was, because initially I thought it was like a kind of a do something ridiculous to get other people to come in and create a bunch of exposure for you because everybody's talking about it. And then see, something like, oh no, guys, that wasn't what we were going to do. This is the real rebrand. Or, maybe come back and say, okay, we listened and now here's the real rebrand or the new rebrand. But instead they chose to double down. So I guess they're serious about taking this direction. But they've alienated most of their customer base. And this is a very dangerous thing to do when you're already being decimated from a sales perspective. So in a second here, we're going to bring up a friend of mine. He's a business credit expert, but works heavily in the automotive industry. Works with hundreds of dealers, probably thousands. I'm not really sure. Chrissy's going to go ahead and pull him up here in just a second. And he's going to talk a little bit about this from an industry perspective. Chrissy, is Ray ready to go? All right. Beautiful. Ray, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you. It's great to be here, Jeremy. It's awesome here.
So tell me what you're seeing. I know you guys are, well, and I also want to get put a little bit of context out here, right? With the credit stuff that you guys are doing, how many individuals, how many transactions are you guys kind of involved with on, say, a monthly basis across the country?
Thousands. And the pandemic really disrupted the auto industry because factories were closed down. It reminds me of back when cash for clunkers was happening. They took a whole inventory of cars out of the market, right?
Yeah.
Car rental places get leases. That's typically who was buying them. Dealers stopped doing that because they didn't have inventory. To back up what you were saying about Jaguar, I think their main goal was to get eyeballs on their car line, because they're going to EV only. They're not even going to do combustion engines in 2026. And I think this whole PR thing was a stunt to get eyeballs, to get the Jaguar name back out into the mainstream, because it's been kind of falling off. So
yeah, there's no argument here. That's been my hypothesis from day one. I just think it's going to fail miserably because they are continuing forward with what is a brand that doesn't appeal to their demographic. But what are you seeing from a transaction perspective? Like how much are you seeing in the initial right now? Is Jaguar being affected from a financial standpoint as a result of this?
Tremendous, because it's a turnoff, and the auto industry was just trying to climb back. Used cars are up 30 to 40%, on average 35%. New vehicles are up 20 to 30%, on average 25%. Interest rates are so high, so people can't afford these vehicles. And the dealerships are struggling just to get customers in the door. And then when they get in the door, they can't qualify because of their credit. So they're fighting an uphill battle. And then to do something like this, which is a turnoff, to not even be able to get people in the door, it's almost like a death nail.
Yeah, I think so as well. And, especially when you look at kind of the fragile state of the automotive industry to begin with, and then Jaguar's minuscule share of market share there. So they're in a very precarious spot. But Ray, I'm going to touch on some more things on this. Thanks for joining us on this, man, and sharing your insight from the industry. And I'll have you on again here pretty soon.
It's awesome. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that one. There we go. All right. So what we're going to talk about here is kind of how the Jaguar situation can apply to your business. So all of us have a situation where, we as the owner or one of our employees can do something that pisses off our clients, essentially, right? Our customers. So there's a few things that we need to look at. All right. The first, where did Jaguar go wrong and where did they go right? So far, from a what did they get right perspective, pretty much nothing. What did they get wrong? Well, the first thing is you can't get pissed at your customers, at your audience for not being interested in whatever it is you're selling. If they're telling you, no, we don't like this, we don't want this, you can't get angry at them. You can't get pissed off at them and, tell them, oh, well, you're just too dumb to get this or whatever, because you're not going to win anybody over that way. Right. So, same applies to if they're telling you, hey, what you're doing does not align with our values. You can't just be like, well, this is what we think everybody should want to do. If you want to target that demographic, you're going to have to give them what they want. Otherwise, you need to pick a different demographic. So it's always a choice. If you want to target a particular demographic, you have to appeal to them. You have to give them what they want. If you're not willing to do that, then if you want your business to survive, you're going to have to change and go after a different demographic. So if you guys want to check out, I actually did a pretty in-depth article for Entrepreneur Magazine. If you look up in the top left corner, you'll see a little link there that will take you straight to that article. If you just pull up your camera and hit that QR code, that will take you straight there. All right, so next up, we are going to talk about how to demonstrate your knowledge, how to demonstrate your expertise without coming off like a douche. And this is something that there's a fine line here, right? You have to tell people what you know, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't make it sound like you're bragging or trying to sound superior to them. So there's a few ways that we can go about this. And like I said, we're going to be careful because there is a fine line. And when you go too far, you start to lose credibility. By the way, the little thing you see up here to the right of me, this is actually a checklist that we put together that gives you a lot of these aspects of public relations and becoming the recognized authority in your industry. This is a little checklist type book that's available on Amazon. All right. So what we want to do is we want to remember that when we're being interviewed in the media, or we're creating a piece of social media content, or, we're on stage sharing our knowledge, whatever we're doing, where we're demonstrating what we know, what we have to do is we have to make that information that somebody can take and do something with that, even if they never become a customer or client, anything like that. So I see a lot of people say, oh, well, show them, give them the what or the why and sell them the how. That's great in theory, but in the way that the media world works today, both traditional and social media, you have to actually give useful, actionable advice. So let's say, for example, somebody's up here, you're being interviewed about, for example, something with this new BOI, the new corporate transparency law. If you're talking about this and people are asking questions about, what is it? How does it apply to me? What happens if I don't do this? And you're just telling them, oh, well, what you need to do is talk to an expert on this and give them a call. And here's all the things, the dangerous things that can happen if you don't, and blah, blah, blah. That's zero value. And it frankly makes you look like a douche. However, if you look at people who are sharing useful information about it, right? Here's what it is. Here's how it applies to you. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you should not do. All of the details here. This is something that can be huge, because if you're sharing this information, you're demonstrating your knowledge and you're doing it in a very humble way. And the cool thing is, in doing that, you're also generating trust. And at the same time, you're going to stand out from everyone else who's, just trying to share the minimal information and, just using it as an opportunity to try and toot their own horn, right? So when you approach this, what you have to think about is, approach everything in this order, right? Because it's not about you. The first priority is always going to be the audience. So you need to give them value in a way that they can take that. And even if they never buy anything from you, work with you in any way, join your community, get on your newsletter, any of that, they just see that segment or they just read that article. If they can walk away from that gaining something that they can apply and improve their life in some way, their life, their business, their finances, whatever, that's the kind of approach that's going to work, right? So audiences first, then you need to look at the network, right? This is the journalists, this is the producers, this is the anchors, whoever is responsible for creating that content. Their needs come next. And last is you. Your needs come last. And that's just the way this works. That's the way the industry always has been. It's the way human nature always has been. So approach it from that perspective. You're going to make a significantly better impact. So a good way you can do this is through direct knowledge, your expertise. So maybe you've got a very unique perspective. So a long time ago, I used to be in the SEO industry. And I had written this article, God, I think it was like 7 years ago now. And essentially it predicted everything that we're seeing today in Google and how Google operates, from a technical perspective, from a legal perspective, from a branding perspective. Pretty much everything that I said in this article about 7 years ago has turned out to be exactly what's going on today. And where this one really had a huge impact for me was this was one that I wrote shortly after I got, kind of back off of my deathbed, still sick, still dealing with all my shit. But that was after my 2-year hiatus. I had written this article up and it was really well received. And then that turned into, because I shared something that was my unique perspective and nobody else was saying what I was saying. So I came out here and I shared this knowledge from my perspective, and this blew up. It was I think it was the #1 article on Search Engine Journal at the time that went live, right? So it was like for that week or that month or whatever, that was the #1 most read article. And that's just a perfect example of using my unique perspective, right? I saw things through a different lens than a lot of other people. And in doing that, I created something that people can really resonate with. I'm not sure if Carlos Garcia is on with us today, but he's another great example. So he is a Marine Corps brother of mine, by the way, but he is a licensed psychologist and works a lot with vets, but also with everybody. And not too long ago, he was featured in Parents Magazine because he had a unique approach that was kind of counter to what a lot of the other people were saying. And that perspective, plus the fact that essentially he walked through this whole thing like it was a case study, essentially, right? It's, oh, well, here's this problem that this person had. Here's how it was affecting their life. Here's what we did to solve it. And here was the outcome, right? That's a lot of very useful information. And it demonstrated his knowledge without him having to do anything, overly promotional or anything like that, right? And it didn't risk his credibility in any way, because all he's doing is saying, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we did. Here's how it played out, right? Great way to do that. Tutorials are another way. So if you get on, whether it's a news segment, whether it's a video, social media content, whatever, and you're actively showing somebody how to do a thing, right? Like I had a live stream that we did a few weeks ago where it was a tutorial showing people exactly how to take down essentially an impersonating page on social media, right? You get those profiles, those pages that people create that are supposed to look like it's you, and then they use those to try and dupe the people in your circle. I did a very detailed tutorial on exactly how to get those taken down when these networks won't take them down. There's actually a great way to do that. But in walking through that information, which is available in the private VIP community, in walking through that information, it showed people exactly how to do it. And in doing so, demonstrated my knowledge, right? But there is a little facet to this that we have to always be aware of, and that is not to mention your credentials unless you're asked, right? So I've got a great example of one here that this is actually a fairly older clip, but great example of how to use your credentials. Basically, you're never going to mention them unless somebody else brings them up. When you do bring them up initially, when you're the first one to bring it up, it actually hurts your credibility because it makes it look like you're trying to get validation, right?
You're simplifying the issues that were on the plate of the nation at that point. I mean, we were looking at reverting into a depression at that point. Everyone, the Fed chairman.
I disagree that we were going into a depression, but go ahead.
Do you have a degree in economics?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Highest honors.
There's not really any coming back from that on for her. But if you're going to use your credentials, that's the way to do it. So we're not going to mention them until someone else brings it up. All right, so that's a wrap on that one. Next up, we're going to talk about the social media network Blue Sky. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have started using this yet. I went ahead and jumped in so that you wouldn't have to. And essentially, what I found was, all right, so a little bit of background on it. First of all, it's not a new platform. This thing's been around for, I think it was launched shortly after Musk bought Twitter, and founded by the same guy who built Twitter in the first place, Jack Dorsey. So we'll talk about who's there first. So when I went over there to check it out after the X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, so-called exodus, I went over there to check it out, and turns out I actually had an account there when it first started. And I guess it was so useless that I had never really popped back in. So far, the user base seems to be a lot of people complaining about a lot of stuff, but there is definitely one valuable demographic there right now, and that is journalists. So historically, X has always been a huge platform for journalists. Some of them have started leaving X, or at least going to Blue Sky in addition to X. So if you want to really connect with that side of the world, the media industry, I think Blue Sky is going to be useful for you. But overall, as a marketing channel, I probably wouldn't recommend it. It's a pretty easy way to waste a lot of time because of the nature of the network. Now, like I said, there's still value there from a journalist perspective. There are a lot of journalists there. So I do think that this has value from that perspective. So let's talk about Kendrick Lamar's album drop. So, all right, full disclosure, I could not identify a single song out of his album, out of his entire library, really. But I actually stumbled across this. My son showed me something about this. But what he had was a really interesting approach to PR. Now, when an album launches, typically what they'll do is there will be a huge PR blitz. They're going to be going on all the shows. They're going to be doing, all the major publications, TV, podcasts, everything. There's going to be a ton of social media activity. Influencers are going to get pulled into the mix. So this time, this did not go that way at all. So his 12-track album dropped just on his social media account, 5 p.m. on Friday. Now that's the antithesis of how you're going to do a launch, right? Typically end of day on a Friday. That's when you do something that you want nobody to hear about. You want to be able to say, oh, well, yeah, well, we talked about that. And then, but here's your thing. It was announced. You don't want people to talk about it. So this was something that really got people's attention because it took a very different approach. So that was awesome from that perspective. But then also, there was a lot of critics talking about, this plan, how he was doing it, et cetera. But his kind of what I'll call an I don't give a fuck attitude about this was what really stood out. So he basically did everything to set the odds against him. And the outcome of that was everybody talking about it online. And then that resulted in all 12 of the songs from his latest album were ranked. So he took the entire first 12 spots on this was on the Spotify charts. So this is a good example of taking a very different approach, right? We all want to look at, hey, what's the process? What strategies are we using from a marketing perspective? Then you just kind of lean on them because they work. But every now and then, it's good to shake things up. It's good to take a completely different approach because you might see a massive outlier. You might see an approach that really blows things up in a way that you get so much more exposure, so much more revenue, and so much more impact. All right. Next up, we are going to talk about tactics to ace your next remote TV interview. All right, so this comes from one of our guides. If you snap a picture of that with your, or not snap a picture, but pull it out up in your camera, you can go straight to that product. But essentially, remote TV interviews are a lot more difficult to get right because you're in a very different environment. It's less controlled than if you were on the set of a TV program. So, and of course, while you've got less control, you've also got to configure, you've got to set everything up yourself. So it's a lot harder to get a performance that really goes above and beyond. So we're going to outline a few tactics to change that, give you an advantage here. So the first is to close any unnecessary programs. So if you've got whatever platform they're doing it in, right? If they're in Zoom, if they're in, StreamYard, Riverside, Restream, whatever, that's the only thing that you should have open. So close all your other browser tabs, close, Netflix, close Spotify, even if it's muted, anything that you've got open and running, close that. And there's two reasons. The first is that they could slow down or even crash your computer in the middle of the interview. And if that happens, it's over with. Usually the way that media is operating, you've got a particular window. Once that's over with, they're going on to the next. And if something goes wrong, they're going to immediately go on to the next. So this is something that will help you to ensure that everything goes smoothly and that you do get something usable out of that opportunity. And it can also rob you of bandwidth. So whether it slows down your computer or it chews up bandwidth while you're doing a remote interview, what's going to happen is you'll start getting that stuttering. You'll start getting that choppiness. The video and the audio don't quite line up. Or you start getting that weird, Transformers kind of Decepticon sound, that nobody can understand what's being said. So this is a really important first step. In fact, the best way I have found to do this is right before the interview, just do a complete reboot, shut your computer off, turn it back on, and then turn back off, because you're going to have the startup programs, right? Turn back off anything there that is not essential for what you're doing. So the next thing we want to do is invest in a quality microphone. Now, audio is the most important part of any kind of video, whether it's a TV segment, whether it is, content for social media, whatever. If that audio is not great, then you're not going to get a very good impact from that video. So that's important to remember, because the information is why you're being interviewed, right? So they want to be able to get that information clearly, and they want to be able to absorb it in a way that's going to be easy. So the cool thing about having really good audio, even if your video goes to shit, is that the producers can use B-roll. So let's say, I'm sitting here talking, I'm being interviewed, and, whatever happens to cause a glitch screws up the video for, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds. Producers can come in here and lay B-roll over that. But since they've still got my audio and it's clean, now that segment can still move smoothly. So this is something that can really save you if something goes wrong from a video perspective. And then the other thing we want to touch on is don't over prepare. So this is a really delicate balancing act, because most people don't prepare enough. A relatively small amount of people do over prepare. And what happens when you do that is you're now so tied into this script that when something goes sideways or they change direction in any way, that then will cause a problem where you spin out. You don't know how to respond because you were expecting the conversation to go this way, and now it's going this way, and you're like a deer in the headlights, and you're just all over the place, and you don't know where to go. So instead, what we want to do is we want to not rely on a script. We want to actually have talking points. Know your stats and data inside and out, of course. Know the anchors that you're going to be talking to. But as long as you've got a loose outline, you're going to have a lot easier time engaging throughout that segment, right? And the other cool thing about this is if you're not sitting here trying to read a script, which may even be up here on your screen, if you're just kind of going off bullet points, you just look at the word and you go back to, or the word of the phrase, and then you go back to that interviewer, right? And because it's just a broad concept, you can talk off the top of your head and you're not trying to follow a rigid script. So it's going to be a lot more natural, and it's going to be a lot more useful for the audience. So that's really important. And we want to make sure that, the camera is framed really well, you got all this stuff and it's all prepared ahead of time. And that's going to give you a really strong position that you can adapt on the fly. Now, something else I will say, just kind of overall, is the more of these that you do, the better that you'll get at adapting. So next up, we're going to, Chrissy, I'm not sure if Carmen popped in with us or not. If she's in the waiting room, go ahead and we'll pull her up. I see we've got a few on the back end. If Carmen is here, let's go ahead and pull that up. Otherwise, let's pop into Q&A. And if anyone's got questions or any feedback or anything, we'll go ahead and roll into that. All right. So Carmen is not with us. Is Dan here, by the way? Oh, okay. Hey, Chrissy, Carmen is here. I just saw a notification on another screen. Let's go ahead and pull her up. So this is kind of an interesting situation. I'm going to go ahead and fill you guys in on the story while Chrissy is getting Carmen all set up. Chrissy, Carmen's got the link to get in as a guest, but if not, just make sure she's got that. All right, so we'll have Carmen come up here and speak in just a second. But I came across this tweet yesterday where essentially she's got a former employer who is, okay, just side note, Chrissy, Carmen says she needs the link. So if you can get her that guest link ASAP, please. All right, so Carmen had a situation where a former employer is basically threatening her with a lawsuit over something that she was saying about the company and how things went down. And this is kind of interesting from two perspectives. One, from a PR perspective, there's some interesting things to talk about from the employer's perspective, and then also from Carmen's perspective as an employee. So what the employer, and we're not going to say who the employer is. We're not going to, turn this into a session like that. But basically, what I want to bring up first is from the employer's standpoint, this is a perfect example of really screwing up from a PR perspective. So the employer had an employee who, for whatever reason, no longer works there, but the Department of Labor in that area, right, the ones who oversaw the unemployment, looked at the case and said, yes, she's justified here. So what her former employer is doing, coming after her, is actually making the whole situation bigger and louder and far worse for the company. So this is the kind of thing that I see happen a lot, where small businesses they'll make a mistake and then they'll just keep tripping themselves and they'll make stupid mistakes like this. All right. What would have been a better approach for them that would help not only their business, their brand, but it would also benefit Carmen as well, would be reach out to her, find out what the issue is, try to resolve it in a way that's going to make her actually happy, make her satisfied. And look, you're going to come to situations sometimes where neither party is going to be satisfied, but you can usually, through negotiation and compromise, you can get to a point where maybe they don't both think they won, but at least they don't both think they lost. And that's what a lot of people don't do. So the business, the employer, failed big time here. Now, Carmen's got an interesting opportunity here. We're going to go ahead and pull her up on screen in a second here. But she's got an interesting opportunity. Hey, Carmen, good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Awesome. All right, so what we're going to talk about is basically how she could use this to her advantage. Now, Carmen's a web developer, runs her own freelance business here. And by the way, Carmen, go ahead and drop a link to your portfolio. If there's anyone in here who needs your services, it might be a good opportunity for both of you guys.
I will do that.
But what I see here as an opportunity is she could very easily take this and turn this into a PR tsunami, basically, right? So stories like this, these are the kind of stories that local media outlets love to cover. So you get your local TV stations, you get your local newspapers, you get your local magazines, and you reach out with this story. So think about it in this context. So first of all, we're in a pretty shitty economy. I think we all can agree on that. So when a company is taking advantage of its employees, that's the kind of story that gets people riled up. That's the kind of story that gets people talking. The newsrooms love to cover stories like this because people share it. They talk about it. It drives eyeballs for those media outlets. So you start pitching this story to local journalists, to local producers, local anchors. First of all, there's a good chance that this gets picked up, but then you can leverage that, and all of those TV segments then become content that you can use in your own marketing. There's certain aspects you'd have to be, well, obviously you can't use the whole segment. It's not going to be super useful from that perspective, but there's going to be things that you say in those segments that you can chop out as micro content. So now you're featured all over the place. You can also then take that content, turn it into a ton of social media content, because there's actually services called clipping services where when you're on TV, you reach out to them and you say, hey, such and such TV show, such and such date and time, whatever, and they will go pull that high res video file that you can buy. Company I've been using, I forget the name of them right now, but I've been using them and I think it works out to about, I don't know, 100, 120 bucks per clip, which is pretty reasonable. But the cool thing about this is what that then opens up for you down the road. So you've now connected with these journalists, these producers, these anchors. Now they know you. You reach back out in the future, right? So you're doing graphic design, so or web design rather. So let's say you've gone through this whole process. They've talked about this, whatever the problem was with the employer, especially around the holidays. Oh, they'll eat that shit up. But now, let's say you've gone through that whole process. Now you can start reaching back out to them, and throughout the process, stay engaged with them. You know, go onto their social media accounts, engage with their content there, like stuff, share it if it makes sense, things like that. But then when you reach back out to them, they're going to recognize you. So let's say we're coming up to end of year, right? 7 things you need to know before you rebrand your website in 2025, right? You've got these stories that you can basically queue up to get people ready, and they already have that relationship. So getting in there is going to get you a lot more traction.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I can just see, just from sharing my story, how many people are connecting with me, because that prompted me to actually write about my experience since I've been laid off, because I've gone about maybe 7 months now without another job, and I've, put it in, like, I'm not even kidding this number, 443 applications.
Ouch.
And so all of that has just compounded, and now I just feel comfortable sharing my story and just the outreach I'm getting, and also people that want to work with me. Like, I hate this had to be the experience that caused that, but no one wants to be in a situation that I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially this time of year. But yeah, that's what I would recommend doing. Start executing on, reaching out to those journos, start pitching them. And that's going to really set you up to crush it as you come into 2025. Like I said before, to everybody else watching, or even if you guys are catching it after the fact, absolutely look her up. I know she dropped a couple of comments on this particular video, so you should be able to find her pretty easy. I took a quick look through her portfolio last night as well. And based on that, her and I are going to be having a conversation shortly about that. So yeah. And that's kind of on a side note, you guys should be looking at who's in the group and who's engaging and who's commenting and whatnot, and looking for opportunities to collaborate. There's a lot of awesome people in here, and there's a lot of things that you guys can all do to maximize what each of you are doing. So everybody, I encourage you all to look for that. There's going to be tons of opportunities in there. All right. Carmen, thanks for joining us. I'm going to switch off to this for a moment here. Oops. Okay. Chrissy, I don't know if Daniel is with us. Is he in? If he is, we'll go ahead and wanted to highlight something we saw over there. If not, let's just go ahead and roll to my PR PSA. What's it going to be today? Anything with Daniel? All right. So we'll go ahead and roll to Jeremy's PR PSA. Now, wow, messaging always matters, and that's the foundation of everything. Sometimes fonts matter as well. So we have to be careful, not only what we're saying, but how it could be seen or perceived by anybody else. All right, so that's a wrap, everybody. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next segment here next Wednesday at 11 Eastern. And hopefully you guys all have an awesome Thanksgiving.